Pastor Eugene, I think our tune has changed a bit. We don't drink Celsius anymore.
We can.
Do you want to? I don't.
Yeah.
I feel like that was a wave. I don't know. I don't really drink it anymore. Kind of scares me a little bit. The unknown scares me.
Why would it scare you?
And that has to do with science.
I heard someone drank too many Celsiuses and got a brain hemorrhage and had to cut out like the front part of his head. Like there's a big divot.
Was it from Celsius?
That's what he says, but everybody's like, that's not. But he got a brain hemorrhage.
Yeah, so I don't really rock with Celsius anymore. Good thing we can get sponsored by them, huh? Yeah, anyway. Speaking of the unknown, we're talking about science. But before all that, good morning. Good morning. Today is August the 21st. Wow. The only time I look at the calendar is when we record the podcast, and time is really flying. And it is the 21st of August today, and we are talking about science, the science, TM.
Science.
And I am a quasi-scientist. I was almost super close to being a scientist. Super duper. Were you ever a scientist, do you think?
I took biology in high school.
Doesn't that make you a biologist, though?
Yeah, pretty much.
But I think you have to have proficiency in multiple sciences to be a scientist, right? Were you good at physics and stuff?
I did take AP physics.
How come if you are good at physics, you are a physicist, not a physician?
What? Two different things.
No, exactly. Anyway, so this is what not having Celsius does. It makes our jokes Fahrenheit. It takes us to new Fahrenheits.
Keep on going.
Come on, give me something. Give me something. Anyway, today, speaking of Celsius and Fahrenheit, we'll be talking about science today, not climate change. And and that's pretty much what we're going to talk about today. Okay, here we go. Welcome to the Dear Church podcast, where we exist to fill your ears and your minds with the study of God to see the world as disciples of Christ. My name is Sam Yang, the scientist, the science guy.
My name is Junsuk Seo.
He is here today. He just doesn't have a mic. He chose this silence. Yeah. But yeah, we have with us Pastor Eugene and Junsuk Seo. At the table once again. He's doing the what is this called? The mixer. He's the mixer table. If you were a DJ, Junsuk, what do you think your DJ name would be? Would it be DJ Junkie?
He said Don Katsu.
Yeah, that's not funny because that's plagiarism. That's identity theft. Anyway, but today, as we review once again the WWE topic from this past Wednesday, we'll be talking about science and how Christians are to view science, our relationship to science, and how do we fight the science? Or should we fight it? TM. I mean, the science, TM. Anywho, as we begin, Pastor Eugene, what is your favorite science? Do you have one? Or is it just kind of like, do you like one?
A particular discipline in the sciences?
That's a better question.
They're all like, correlated, intertwined. But I do like physics a lot.
So if you had to pick one, physics would be your number one.
I don't know. It's the same thing with like theology. What's the one study that you like, Which doctrine do you really like? That kind of stuff.
I guess.
Yeah, it's good. They're all kind of correlated.
I didn't like any of it. Now that I think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why you didn't.
I was really close.
Become a scientist.
Yeah, I was really close though. They almost got me. But I wanted to just go over some of the questions and I guess really a quick brief summary of the science talk that you gave this past Wednesday, which again is available on our CGS app. But if I can get the gist, or I guess a one-liner of your talk this past Wednesday, it was that Science and faith are not opposed. Intellect and faith are not opposed, but they are all. They're all. It's. How would you? Could you give us a one line?
If there's one thing and you said like three things.
Could you? Yeah, that's my first question. Could you give us a one liner?
Well, all truth is God's truth.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
I just took a roundabout way. So all truth is God's truth. Now, some of the questions that came in during the discussion portion was your discussion on proteins. You talked about the AGCT in the DNA double helix and how, some people that believe in evolution believe that these proteins mutated to a completely new sequence. That's pretty much what they're suggesting by believing in macroevolution. Can you just kind of explain what you meant by that? And also, don't proteins mutate? Isn't that why different phenotypes exist?
Yeah. So microevolution definitely does exist and happen. Adaptation does happen to a certain degree, but that's not what macroevolution is purporting. It's purporting that a brand new species, meaning an entirely new set of DNA or a blueprint of how proteins get synthesized and produced and carried and things like that, happen. And that's exactly what a species is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we have in our each one of our cells, we have DNA guiding how the cells should, process these proteins.
Yeah.
And to have a different species means you have a different set of blueprints. And so the one thing I did talk about was it's a little crass, but it is an example like computer code. If you were a computer programmer, you can change one line or here or there. But if you wanted to change the entire code to a different program, it just doesn't happen code by code. Eventually, the code will fail and it will be defunct, meaning it won't run. I think a better example was something I heard from, I think I want to say he's like, he has a PhD in physics or something like that. I forget. He is a scientist, a polymath to a certain degree, but his name is Stephen Meyer. And I have one of his books in my office. It's really great. I think, I recommend his read if you ever read one of his books. But he did say it's more than just a computer program. It's like a circuit board, and it's a complex circuit board. As you could change one or two things on the circuit board and the circuitry, but it doesn't become. You can't have an entirely different circuit board by changing some of the circuitry.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't work like that. You'd have to change the whole foundation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so he gives that example, meets with, many molecular biologists across the world. They all have conferences and gatherings, and they discuss many, perhaps for us it's highfalutin, but, or like the word that you like, erudite.
Oh yeah, I like that one.
But it is still an important discussion to have. And a lot of biologists, believe it or not, actually side with him. You can't just have a brand new, species out of nowhere from these smaller evolutionary, processes that perhaps took place over the course of time. And I think that's the issue here. A lot of people who believe in macroevolution, they're like, oh, we're atheists. You always cover the answer with God. God did this. God did this. Well, our response could be exactly the same. Well, you always cover your questions with time. Like time is going to do it. Time is the answer for everything. And so they don't see that what they replace with God is time, and time has no power. And so, just like R.C. Sproul would say in many of his talks and his books, chance has no power on its own. You can't just say it's by chance something happened. And so the more we find out about, the complexity of the code and how important it is that we keep up the integrity of the code in our DNA, otherwise you die. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so the more your DNA degrades over time, your cells degrade, it can't reproduce, it can't continue to grow, multiply. Then death starts to occur, and then you die. And so those are things that we know more and more now. I don't know how we even came up philosophically with the notion that you continue to change these little microstructures in our blueprint and our DNA, and all of a sudden you get a brand new species. And Darwin didn't prove it. He proved microevolution with the finches, with the finches on his island, but never proved macro. It wasn't a brand new species that came across. The birds didn't all of a sudden become fish. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so those are things that will always be unanswered. And, time isn't a good answer, in my opinion. And so that's what people continue to purport and saying, if you don't believe in evolution, then you are unintellectual. This is what I wanted to push up against. In the end, we are saying that you cannot. So the reason why I gave the answer is you cannot believe in the theories of macroevolution and still be intellectual. You could still be a brilliant scientist like Stephen Meyer and many of his peers. But the culture is saying if you don't believe in evolution, meaning macroevolution, then you must not be intellectual. You must be someone of faith. And so we have now juxtaposed and separated it to the degree where if you have faith, you can't be intellectual. If you're intellectual, you can't have faith, which is nonsensical. And that was the point I was trying to get across.
Pastor Eugene, I made two mistakes. Number one, adenine is not a protein. I don't know why I said protein. It's a nucleo. It's a base.
It's a base of the double
nucleic acid. Yeah. And then second of all, I realized we just jumped into this topic without even laying a foundation down. I realized we didn't even distinguish between micro or macro for those that may be unfamiliar with the term. And yeah, so but we're going to go back real quick. Keep this detailed portion in your mind. But before we go into that, macroevolution versus microevolution. The microevolution, I believe, is when different throughout time, the same species will exhibit different characteristics that can help them survive. So, for example,
and adapt,
right? And so, but it's staying within the same species. So, for example, if a bird is introduced into a new environment, throughout the next generations, this bird can change color to better adapt and blend into its new surroundings, right? That's microevolution. Whereas macroevolution is different in that the proponents of macroevolution believe that species can change, like a fish or an amoeba can turn into a bigger amoeba, turn into a lizard, turn into a fish, turn into a monkey, turn into a human.
Yeah. So a ton of microevolutionary processes can eventually become so different from the original species that it's an entirely different species.
Right.
And this is what, people don't believe because the base never changes. The base of who you are or the species that would never change. You're still a bird.
Gotcha.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. If I'm a bird, you're a bird. Do you know where that's from?
No.
One of my favorite movies. Made me cry.
No.
Come on.
If I'm a bird, you're a bird?
Yeah. Wait, is
Barbie.
that the right? Oh my goodness.
You saw it, huh?
You know, it's crazy. Actually, the actor in Barbie is in that movie. It's called The Notebook. Actually, that's a lie. I don't even like Ryan Gosling that much. But then going from there, I want to go to like a broader question. Where do you see the tension between faith and science today? So, I mean, another question could be, why did you choose to talk about science out of all the topics that you could have talked about?
Yeah, it's just a lot of the topics that we do bring up in the WWE is people trying to separate those topics between, whether it's politics or economics, between that and faith or our religion. And I'm trying to say there is a worldview in which you can view every one of these, subjects. And to separate them would be detrimental to not just our faith, but our being. We would live almost like a schizophrenic life where one day we are Christian and the other day we are quote unquote intellectual.
Yeah.
And so that's not how we are to live. We're supposed to live all for the glory of God. Everything has to do with our faith, and intellect is not separate from the faith. But science in particular has an interesting history because what happened with the Copernican revolution versus, even to Galileo was they were going against the church. So people automatically assume now with the Copernican revolution and Galileo with, his discoveries through his telescope and things like that, because they were going against the church fathers, they must have been going against religion. And so that's when people call it the Copernican revolution, because of how they saw the world was not in the center of not even the universe, but even our solar system, versus the Ptolemaic way of seeing it, where the earth was at the center of the universe, and saying that the Bible says that the earth is at the center of the universe, which I don't really see. I don't see that anywhere in the Bible. And the best I could come up with was maybe what Genesis 1:14 and on would say about how the suns and the moon and the stars would shine for the earth. That doesn't mean we're in the center, right?
Right.
And so beside that, I don't think it ever talks about us being in the physical center of anything. And so that was what was happening, where people would have this theology, and science wouldn't ever guide it or correct it, or could bring light to some of the things that they saw was wrong. And they would say, no. Science could never even touch, the theological realm, which is not true. And so if it's true, it's true, period. Whether it's in theology or in the hard sciences like physics or chemistry or biology. And so that's what I really wanted to get across with the science seminar.
Truth is truth.
Yes.
Truth is truth is truth. If that's the case, I guess the next question is, if science is important to the Christian, and this kind of is related to the politics talk as well, and some questions that came out from there, how much should a Christian try to know about science or seek to know science if it has nothing to do with our job? Is this important enough for us to continue to study it like politics, or how do we kind of handle that?
Well, today, I think a lot of people are interested in having the ability to defend their faith. And one of the ways our faith is attacked is with science. And so one of the things that, it's politics as well, but science as well. And now they're kind of intermingled with each other with Fauci and all these. People think Fauci's like the devil. I don't think he's the devil. I think there are people that were worse than Fauci, like Francis Collins, but that's a different story. He spoke at Tim Keller's memorial.
Oh.
Yeah, I think he is truly somebody that I think he was just, truly represented evil ideas. He's the guy that supported LGBTQ plus. He's still saying he's a Christian, and he supported fetal cell research. Not only that, he went as far as to take. Now you could double check this one for me, Sam, or Junzak. He would take the scalps of aborted babies and put them on rodents for research. He would support that research.
Collins, who identifies as a Christian and is a member of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, made his remarks during a private event at the University of Chicago in October. The Daily Wire reported, citing a leaked audio recording, he responded to a student who asked him about National Institutes of Health funding for experiments such as the University of Pittsburgh studies that involve the harvesting of aborted baby parts at 6 to 42 weeks gestation and grafting scalps of aborted babies onto lab rats. So yeah.
That is terrible. I don't know what else to say. I want to say that that's like evil. And yet he's the guy that Tim Keller, Russell Moore, and all these guys said they were good friends, that you should listen to him when it comes to the science on COVID. You should wear masks. And it doesn't mean he was wrong on it, but he wasn't a good guy to ever put on a pedestal of any sort, is my point. And so the fact that he was even, said he even spoke at the memorial of Tim Keller really does kind of irk me to to a deep, disturbing degree.
Mm.
But yeah, that's where we are. So a lot of people think like, it's the science. You are religious. You have nothing to do with science. You should, keep your mouth shut.
Mm-hmm.
And here, because I believe in science, I have more to say. And so I think Christians are now coming up against with that kind of argument. What are you, a scientist? Where's your degree? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then that science would now, that bubble of science, that circle of science has now overtaken a bunch of matters on faith, even to the nominal degree where, they want to dictate how you worship. Where you, because of the science, you should mask and not sing in your churches. And so, how do we defend against attacks like that? And it was a slew. It was like an onslaught of attacks in the name of science, how Christians should live. And even what is it, Coronavirus and the Church, that website where they had a bunch of interviews with the big Eva types.
Yeah.
And Francis Collins, I believe Russell Moore was on it. Tim Keller was on it. Anyway, saying that if you really love your neighbor, you have to mask. If you really love your neighbor, we have to, get a vaccine, quote unquote, a vaccine, right? If you really love your neighbor, then get, your booster shot every 6 months. And if you don't, that means you don't love your neighbor. And I was like, wow, that's taking us a step too far, in my opinion, especially since it's so novel and we don't even know the long-term effects. Even now, we don't know all the long-term effects, but we do know that there's something specious going on. There's something that's not entirely right, and they aren't giving us all the numbers. And so even to think that now you're called a conspiracy theorist, anti-science, anti-intellectual. So how do you defend against attacks like that? Because you don't want to be looked at as dumb in the society. You want to be looked at as smart. You went to college, you got your graduate degree, your master's, your PhD. You don't want to be dumb. And so, yeah, you have to be, the whole wave is going that way. Are you going to swim against the wave? You're going to die. You can't swim against the tsunami of these statements that if you don't do this, you're anti-science, you don't love your neighbor, you're not really being Christian. And all these statements are coming out. And so how do you defend yourself against something like that? And I wanted to get to the base of where this was coming. This is coming from this idea that science and faith are to be separated, not only distinguished, but separated. And because it was separated, we have all these things where faith and politics should be separated, and faith and economics should be separated, and faith and now even gender studies should be separated, that kind of thing. And so all these things are now separated. What we don't know is the church has given up so much ground and so much authority that God has given the church to preach his word, to teach his word. And we've given it up, in the name of science or economics. And I think that is a grave mistake. And I think that's why the church is where we are, because we've given up so much ground voluntarily because we didn't want to look stupid. We didn't want to look unintellectual.
So then I guess my question is, how then would you talk to somebody that has a hard time putting science and religion together, and as a matter of fact, thinks that, faith and fact, faith and intellect cannot commingle? They're not the same. How would you talk to people? How would you kind of guide people that may think this way?
I think you just have to be, honest. You have to hold on to truth. People are going to hate you. When it, oversteps, whatever government authority would overstep its bounds and come into the authority of the church or go against what God has commanded, we speak out. We talked about this in our, I think, politics or government podcast, where even, was it Peter and John or James? I forget. Yeah, in Acts, when they told him to shut up and not preach, they said we can't go against God. It's God who told them to preach.
Right.
And so that's exactly what it is. If it's going against the authority of God, we are the ones that speak up against that, saying, you are, even you, the worldly authorities are under God. You can't go against God. And so we are the ones that speak out against that. That's not going against the authority of the government. We are saying the government has overstepped its bounds. And so that's what we should be doing. And that's why I still haven't watched The Essential Church, but I do enjoy what was that book that we read? What? God vs. Government. Yes. Thank you, Junsak. And, we saw the accounts of what happened in Canada, what happened in LA and all these other places where, they stood up and they stood against the government, and they paid a steep price. They paid hefty fines and they suffered. Like pastors were jailed. Their families and their babies were crying as their dads were being taken away on specious charges. They didn't even know what they were really being charged with. And they didn't know how long they'd be locked up because there was no due process. And so these are terrible things that we saw in our world today, because I believe that the world is going further and further away from, the standard rule that God has given. And at the same time, the churches are not teaching it, And so I do believe that in a certain degree today, if you're a Christian, you should at least be aware. I'm not saying you should be an expert. You shouldn't get your degree in
astrophysics.
I don't know what that has to do with
meteorology.
COVID, but yeah. In epidemiology. But, it doesn't mean you have to get your degree there. But it does mean you should be knowledgeable to a certain degree. Even non-Christians were basically persecuted for not going against what the government said. Now people are saying ivermectin is a wonder drug. Isn't that crazy? Because people are saying now ivermectin is a wonder drug to fight against COVID, but no one's going to say that in, the broad media. But hospitals are using it. Doctors are recommending it more and more now because it really helps fight off, the fever and the virus. Which is great. Isn't that great? And so, but then didn't we basically our culture crucify Joe Rogan for taking ivermectin, saying he's taking horse dewormer? Joe Rogan's not even a Christian. He just went against, he just said, no, this is good stuff. That's what I'm taking. And then, there were clips of him doing a little video selfie talking about ivermectin, and CNN reposted that video and they put a yellow tint on it to make him look sicker. That's crazy. Yeah. Why are they doing things like that? And so, now it's wow, how do you fight off against that? Well, first thing is awareness. Are you aware that this is going on, or are you still being blind sheep? And I think that's where a lot of government collapse happens, when the constituents, the citizens of the free nation willingly give up their powers. Happens all the time in history, and it's happening now, but people are rightly and smartly standing up against that.
So, I think the disagreement that some people may have is that science is fact. It's experimental fact. This is the truth. This is the cold, hard truth. Whereas religion and faith is kind of like this kind of feely, just kind of spiritual thing that you feel and all this other stuff, versus the cold, hard truth. And that's why we have to follow science. How would you talk to somebody that believes that and can't put science and religion together? How would you guide them?
Yeah, I think, they have the definition of science wrong. Science is observation. It's identification. It's experimental. The scientific method is there for a reason. That's where we get science. It's a theoretical explanation of what this might be, of any kind of phenomena, any kind of happening, any kind of observation. We want to make sense of it. So there's this inductive property to science that we must at least be aware of, but the deduction can be wrong. That's the point. But when you say the deduction is fact, that's where you should stand up against that. It's that's not true. once a new element is introduced, once a new factor or variable is introduced into the equation, the answer changes. So science doesn't. No scientist in their right mind would say that they have all the observable facts and statistics out there.
Mm-hmm.
Like they have exhausted every single observation that could be possible on the subject.
Mm-hmm.
That's nonsense.
Yeah.
The point is they want to get more and more data to solidify their theory.
Yeah.
Through the scientific method. And so when you say things like science is fact, that doesn't make any sense. Science uses facts and observations to come up with a deduction. So science is inductive in its, just the raw processes that it's doing. It's inductive. It's gathering information. And, how you process that information then is what gets debated. That's why you have peer reviews. That's why you have constant debates in science. And by the way, theology is a science. It's ology. It's a knowledge. It's a study, right? And so science is also a study. You're studying what is observable in the universe. And study is it should always be met with some kind of pushback saying, are you sure this is right? Did you double check your findings, your reports, and to come up with the conclusion that you did? Because if not, your deductions will lead us to do something. It's going to lead to an application. If they're wrong, that application could have potentially dire and detrimental effects on society, especially if it's something to do with, let's say, the health sciences, where you have to wear masks or inject a novel drug into your system, the mRNA technology. And then if you're not going to report fully to the public on like all the VAERS reports and you're going to keep that quiet, then it's suspicious to a lot of people. You know what I mean? And so, of course, people have, reason to then doubt your deduction because you've continually rejected any other new observation, new facts that should have been put in the formula. And you're holding on to a deduction that was 3 years old or something to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
And so people are like, oh, there's new variants of COVID coming out. It's time to mask up again. It's like, what? Are you not taking any new data about masking, especially when it comes to children? And so, those are things where people are like, well, I've heard about COVID so exhaustively on the news. They talked about it so much. I just don't want to, relearn the thing again. And I get it. I think they've done a great job in not talking about it exhaustively, but exhausting you in their talking about the same thing, hammering you. And if you don't believe this, then you're anti-science. You must be dumb. You must be anti-intellectual. They keep on hammering this thought into you. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, you are on the outskirts. You're a freak, you're a hunchback, that kind of thing. They look at you like a weirdo. And, not knowing that you wearing your mask inside your car with the windows up alone, that's not weird, apparently. That's a completely normal, insane thing to do, apparently, for some people.
So I know this question came up before, and it was along the lines of, why do we always talk about LGBTQ and abortion? Aren't there other topics to be discussed? And our answer was because this is at the forefront of open rebellion against God in our generation. I think the same could be asked, why do you always talk about COVID? Shouldn't we move past it already? Why is it so important for us to continue to talk about COVID, Pastor Eugene?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing as where we can continue to talk about, let's say if you're Korean, people continue to talk about how the Japanese made a lot of Korean women sex slaves. They try to commit these great atrocities by committing genocide, by raping the women, yes, but even the children, they would change their last names.
Yeah.
You were no longer Kim or Lee or Park. You were a, Takahashi or, Yamaguchi or something like that, right? And they would change their last names. And that's the one way they would try to commit genocide. It's not to hate the Japanese. I don't think a lot of the newer generation of Koreans hate the Japanese. but it's to teach them this is history and this is what we got to continue to watch out for, because people will try to employ the same tactics or similar tactics, and you should, learn from it. I don't think people have learned from this. They just want to move on from it.
Yeah.
Moving on and learning are completely different things. And so it's the same thing with, you had a heart attack, you went to the hospital, and the hospital's telling you, you're too, let's say the doctors look at you and you're too sedentary, you need to move around more. In the minimum, please walk like 30 minutes a day, get some sunlight. If they tell you that, like, no, doctor, I'm tired of hearing this. I just want to move on. Does that make any sense to anybody? And so we've had detrimental effects because of COVID policies, lockdowns, what they try to enforce on us with the, quote unquote vaccines and masking and things like that. Okay, what do we learn? What do we learn? Where are the apologies for those that were wrong? What about the politicians who said, this is science, or we're going to have a winter? I think it was our president who said 2 years ago, we're going to have a black winter or a dark winter because people haven't gotten their vaccines or something like that. Where was that dark winter? It didn't happen. So is there an apology? Is there a retraction? Is there anything that we learned from this? Or we're just moving on to the next topic at hand and then, screaming about the next thing, which is, whatever political issue that they put on the news.
Yeah.
So for me, it's no, I want to go back. I want to talk about it because there are things to be learned, especially in the church. In the church, there are things to be learned. And one of the things that I do mention from time to time is, weren't you scared? Weren't you scared because of what the public media said and the public administration said?
Yeah.
Weren't you scared that you might pass it to your parents who have like some sort of, disease or some comorbidity rate that's higher than yours, right? You have diabetes or high blood pressure or something like that. Or your grandparents who are old and this disease can be potentially fatal to them, much more fatal than it would be to you. So weren't you really scared? And didn't that affect how you lived your life? Didn't that affect then how you worshiped? Didn't that affect how you gathered and had fellowship and treated one another with dignity and respect, especially if they disagreed with you? Didn't you get angry when someone disagreed with what you thought was the right way of handling COVID? Where's your apology? Where's your retraction? Where's your learning from these mistakes? Or do you just want to move on? And that's what I really want to get at. Weren't you wrong? And so when something like, if you haven't learned and you just want to move on, guess what? Government can come back and say, there are new variants and these variants can spread. Why don't you start masking again? And then you'll be like, okay, why not?
Yeah.
And so that means we haven't learned anything. You can't just move on. It doesn't work like that. One day you keep on crossing the street when there's oncoming traffic. One day you'll get hit by a car.
So I think one of the key things to understand, at least for me, in this discussion between science and faith, as we have actually talked about this in the past couple of years, Pastor Eugene, is the fact that, like you said, science is a methodology, is a study of the truth. It's not truth itself. It's the study, observational study of the truth, than to make theories or laws of what we think might be happening. Seeing the natural world around us and observing and making conclusions as to what we think may be happening, which many times is wrong. But a lot of times people will say religion and faith, that's unproven, less proven than science. How would you answer to something like that?
That's something like what Neil deGrasse Tyson would say. Like, science is what we know for sure. And, religion is just based
speculation
on,
or interpretation or,
it's just, like believing in specters, ghosts and things like that.
Yeah.
There's no scientific basis for it.
Right.
Well, I mean, one of the things is science is about observation of the natural world. And the Bible does talk about the natural world a lot, actually. It talks about not just the natural world, but it talks about earthly wisdom and things like that. Just wisdom in general, common sense, laws that you should have, so that in the natural world you can flourish and grow and be successful and, do well, be fruitful, things like that. But not only that, but the Bible talks about how we can live for eternity. It goes beyond the natural into the supernatural. And reason being is the Bible shows us that we are created for the natural and supernatural, not just the natural. We are not simply physical beings, but we have a soul. And so those are things that we are taught, that you feel and that you understand in the deepest recesses of your being. There's some truth to that, and the Bible reveals to us to what degree what we knew in the past was true or false, and corrects us and guides us. And it's something that we can continue to, like in science, we can continue to put up against with experimentation. Is it really good for us to follow the laws of God? And you can look at it in an observable way when you look at nations. When they follow, well, first of all, they need to have good laws. And secondly, they must have a following of those good laws. So the United States has good laws. It does. It's the Constitution and all its laws are based on biblical realities and biblical truths, biblical law. But there are countries without good laws, and they are a mess, 100%. But then what happens when you are a country with good laws, but people don't follow those laws? They don't follow, let's say, the Supreme Court rulings. Like Harvard is still coming out trying to figure out ways on how to, go around, the affirmative action ruling, and still want to keep the diversity quota that they have, things like that. So when you don't follow the good rules, you see that it's also detrimental to the country. And so that's why, we want to there are observable things, but there are also things that are unobservable that we also recognize. But it doesn't mean, unobservable does not mean it is irrational. And that's one thing that we could take a long time talking about. Just because it's unobservable with our five senses and we do something doesn't mean it's irrational. There are a lot of things that we know that we do are unobservable that are completely rational. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so one case in point is when Hebrews talks about the exemplars of the faith. Abraham was promised this thing. He didn't see it in his life, but we know it came true, right? He has a descendants, more than the grains of the sands of the oceans, like on the beaches and the shores, right? More than the stars of the sky. Absolutely, he does. And so we know that even though it wasn't observable at the time, he didn't realize it in his life, but still it became true. So those are things that faith teaches us, that God shows us is true. It does happen. And, those are things that perhaps, science and things like that may go push up against, saying if you can't do it with the five senses, then it's irrational. Not true. And I will push up against that notion too, but we somehow have this notion. But science doesn't work that way either. There's a bunch of things that we can't observe right away, but we just know that it must be true. Like when we measure the distances of the stars, and we know that there are billions, maybe even more further, light years away, the way the scientists have now come to measure how far they are away, there's like infrared and red light spectrum. You guys know like how it's longer than the rest. And so the way they measure the waves is they realize that the stars are moving away from us by measuring the red spectrum in those waves, right? They are moving away from us. What does that mean? That they were once closer. And then if you continue to think about it, logically and rationally speaking, that means they was even closer than perhaps we thought, even to the point of what people are now saying, calling the Big Bang, right? That kind of thing. But if the stars were that close to us, how did time, physics, matter, space, how did all those things exist in this one, kind of infinitesimal point of, potential, things like that. And so people are talking about that, which is great. But then is that irrational to think that just because you can't observe or you weren't able to observe the stars being any closer than it was before? No, because there are evidences outside that we do observe, but there are evidences outside that we may observe later on. It's not irrational to think about these things and to come to certain conclusions, especially when it comes to the Word of God, because the Word of God has proven to be true time and time again. And so, yeah, I don't think it's irrational to be a person of faith, even though you may not see perhaps the ground in front of you. You can walk it because of faith, and that is not irrational,
Right.
because the Word of God tells us that it's there.
Gotcha. As parents, we see in our school curriculum, and actually Chunsak brought this up this past Wednesday, but I believe that evolution is now taught as a law, the law of evolution in schools, at Rutgers, I think specifically. And so as parents, how do we deal with evolution being taught in school, especially as a law now? Do we pull our kids out of those classes? How do we kind of handle this? Maybe not even in college, but in elementary school and middle school, high school, whenever they learn bio and they have the underlying, I guess, groundwork of evolution in their curriculum. How do we handle that?
Yeah, so I did talk about, I'm not sure if I talked about it. Did I talk about my biology teacher? He was Jewish, yeah. And he said, you can be a creationist, but I'm here to teach evolution. It was actually one of my favorite courses. To learn about, biology and the sciences at the time. And then I took physics and I was blown away because when I was in high school, biology was a freshman level course and physics was a sophomore level course. And so I really, really enjoyed physics. I really enjoyed biology. Actually, physics might have been a junior level course.
It was
chemistry,
for me.
Chemistry was a sophomore level course.
Oh, same for me.
And I did not like chemistry. Chemistry is the one thing I didn't like, which is interesting. But
yeah.
Now just physics and chemistry, astrophysics, all that stuff fascinates me. As a layperson, I really do enjoy it, and I'm glad that schools were able to teach that basic foundations of these hard sciences, so that I could enjoy it. I'm not saying everybody has to, right? But what was the question?
It was
about evolution. Yeah. And so, how do we, deal with that? I don't think there's anything wrong with learning theories. I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to learn a bunch of other things. But my issue is when they're wrong, they can't take it back because they have gone all in on this Darwinian macroevolutionistic theory. And they're saying this is not theory, this is fact. Meaning, if you even call it a theory, then you must be some kind of, unintellectual bumpkin that doesn't know anything. And so that is not intellectual at all. Even that kind of statement is anti-intellectual. And yet they're making statements like that. So if we go hard on these things, then, as parents, you want to teach your children, right? If they're going to bring evolutionary biology all the way to the elementary school level, for example, then you need to know what they're learning and you need to prepare them for what might come up ahead. And, one of the things that I am thankful for is that churches still teach the Bible to whatever degree, but churches still teach the Bible. So when we come up against anti-biblical notions and theories, we are the ones that, like a flag goes up in your head. Well, that's kind of weird. Why are you saying that God doesn't exist? That kind of thing in school. When I'm learning ever since I was a kid was God is the founder of all things. He's the creator of all things. It's because of him we have existence. And so those are things, if you have a good foundation, it will help. And so hopefully we'll set up a good foundation for our children and move on from there.
So now moving on to my favorite portion of this podcast, you talked about aliens and you talked about the Avengers, and we've talked about this multiple times, more times than I can count, probably twice, on this podcast. So can you just talk to us about it? You brought up aliens and
Well, the talk I brought up aliens because it is becoming more and more paganistic. I remember talking with my pastor friends about this and saying, they wanted to talk about aliens. It's like, yeah, I'd love to talk about aliens. But, they were saying, I was saying it's becoming the talk about aliens is becoming more and more paganistic. And they try to correct me. They said, you mean secular? And I said, no, I mean paganistic. And so now we have, PhD scientists who work for the government, who is working for the government, that are coming out. And one of the scientists that I mentioned was Dr. Stephen Greer. He was part of a documentary that you can now find on YouTube as well. And it's called, what is it called again? Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. And you can find Close Encounters of the third kind. That's all the other of whatever kind. And if you continue to look at it, what he is doing is, if you listen to him, he is using or masking paganistic ideology with scientific terminology. And so that's something that, if you're aware of that, it would bring up a flag. Like, you could talk about quantum holographic theories and, about quantum entanglement and things like that. And I talked about it briefly in the WWE, and I think I lost a ton of people when I talked about it, to be honest, about quantum entanglement. Were you there when I talked about it?
I wasn't there for that portion, no.
Right, Jansuke? It was a little, it was okay. But anyway, I talked tiny bit about quantum entanglement. If you spin, a particle one way and then, you separate it whatever distance, then the other particle that has been quantumly entangled will spin the same way. But there's, integrated quantum holograms. And so you have this projection from higher realities projecting onto the lower reality, which would be Earth and things like that. That's why aliens can come and quote unquote visit our planet, because of, this holographic projection that they are able to do, this technology that they have, and through quantum entanglement that they're able to achieve certain things. All this stuff. But that's not the point. The point is that they're using these novel theories to kind of make sense of perhaps how aliens can do this, except now they are saying, going beyond that, saying that even people especially people like Dr. Stephen Greer. See, this stuff is not that exciting, perhaps to everybody, but it is to me.
It is.
No. Anyway, that we must have a global diplomatic initiative, unquote, according to him, between humans and these advanced civilizations. And we must do these, he didn't use the word seances, but we must do these things that will help us make contact with intelligent beings from another higher universe or a different universe, because, we must interface with them. And we're able to do that if, through meditation, through whatever, by using our consciousness and things like that. And then sometimes, and this is what he'll say, sometimes we can come across celestial beings, but that's just part of the process. Celestial beings meaning what? He says the word angels, but he doesn't say the word demons. But it's implied. If you can go to a celestial being, that means you can encounter a demon through your, seances. And that's what it is. And so when they were talking about all this stuff in this, what they mask as a scientific documentary, you see it as purely occultistic. It's new age. It's literally doing seances, literally what Hitler was doing with his cronies and the people that were on his, board and advisory board and things like that. And so that's why I said what I said. It is occultism. It is a terrible thing that now people are maybe gonna give way into, where they believe in aliens. Oh, you believe in aliens? Then, we must make contact, because they want to make contact with us for a reason. What's the reason? And so when we make contact with them, it's because they want us to know that war is unnecessary, that peace is possible. No, I'm not kidding. People say things like that. And, they want to save us from, us destroying ourselves. And so we should make contact with them. If we make contact with them, we know that we have a higher purpose than, the small menial fights of the earth. Why are we fighting over scraps of grain and things like this on this earth when there's so much more to be discovered on the earth and in the universe? And so, yeah, let's make contact. They're against war. They want peace. And yeah, you know what? Yeah, the Bible talks about other religions talking about peace when there was no peace.
Mm.
And the people are falling for it. They're falling, head over heels over stupid things like that.
Yeah.
And here we are. A bunch of people are falling for this nonsense. Look, is there evidence of non-terrestrial beings being recorded besides it being, perhaps like mechanical malfunction or something like that? Like your radar is bad or you were maybe hallucinating. But that's rough because now we have two eyewitnesses of the same phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, people, we have an explanation for that in the Bible. It's called demons, folks,
Yeah.
It's called angels or demons. And like I said before, if they were angels, they would have a message.
Yeah.
That's why they're angels. And demons are there to deceive. And so, they were the ones that possessed people, that fooled people. And so, yeah, we do have an explanation for that. Is it necessarily from an extraterrestrial being from Alpha Centauri or some further, galaxy? No, I don't think it really proves any of that. And when these quote unquote government whistleblowers come out and say they have biologics and they're like, did you witness this? It's like, no, but I know someone that has witnessed the biologics. It's like, what? So now what are we, like 3 people away? So it's not secondhand, but third hand that we're supposed to believe. So that's kind of foolish in my opinion, that we would put so much stock in aliens when that's what's on the media, that's what's in the congressional hearings and things like that. But I think it's pulling us away from keeping our eye away from the prize, and that's my concern.
My response to that is I saw Spider-Verse the other day, so that was cool, the holographic from higher to lower realm.
Okay.
One of the questions that actually came up regarding this was, do we ever see in the Bible demons being visible of their own? Meaning we know we've seen demons possess people, and we've seen in the Old Testament, especially angels or the commander of the Lord's army, angels come, messengers of God come in visible form. And we see descriptions of the seraphim and the cherubim in Isaiah, but do we ever encounter a demon as a demon?
Yeah, I mean, Jesus' temptation is the one that I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah.
People think that the temptations were just a vision, but that's not how the Bible writes it. It says Jesus was taken. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it seems like he was physically taken by what you would just naturally read from the text. And if he wasn't physically taken, then I don't really see that being proven with what we see in the text. Anyway, so we do see that. We know of other instances extra biblically of people witnessing demons, obviously. Martin Luther apparently had a lot of bouts against Satan, Lucifer, purporting himself to be an angel of light. And that's what the Bible says in the New Testament, in the epistles, talks about how, Satan comes out as an angel of light. And, we're supposed to be, we're warned, not to fall for things like that.
Yeah.
And so I would think that then, if the Bible says that, we should be wary of those kinds of, manifestations, if they do occur, that we wouldn't offer it reverence and glory, because that's what demons or Satan would want. And Satan is just the Hebrew word, meaning adversary. Satan is the Hebrew word for adversary. So it's not like Michael.
Yeah.
But even Michael has a name, is a meaning, right?
Yeah.
Right hand of God, or, the power of God, or something like that. And so Satan, that meaning behind Satan is adversary.
The ops.
Yeah. So he is the one that is against us.
Yeah.
So those are things that we get to see. And, I believe we are told this so that we can be on guard, that we know how to put up our defenses properly. And the Bible doesn't leave us defenseless; it teaches us. And I think it's a very, very important thing to know that.
Thank you for that, Pastor Eugene. I do think that the discussion on aliens is really interesting when we start to understand that maybe this is not a science. Maybe it really is, like you said, a cult. It's a spiritual thing.
I think people will eventually come to realize that science, when it says we are not religious in any way, that doesn't hold for long. It doesn't hold water for long.
Yeah.
And they'll go into the cult or paganism.
Yeah.
They'll go into some sort of, belief that is not new. There's nothing new under the sun. But they'll purport themselves to be novel, things like that.
Yeah.
And so those are things that we need to watch out for. They'll use scientific language, and what they'll do is they'll use that as a mask for their underlying paganistic or new age or occultistic beliefs.
Right.
And that's what we need to be aware of. And you can't just use scientific language and, mask what is truly demonic. And I think that's something that, hopefully the Holy Spirit will continue to reveal to those in his church.
Thank you for that, Pastor Gene. And as you said...
Oh, I also meant to mention that's exactly what climate change is about too now. Yeah. They come to this religious fervor where people like from organizations like Just Stop Oil are blocking traffic. And I remember watching this one video of a woman who needed to take her baby to the hospital, and they were blocking traffic, and she was pleading with them, I need to take my baby to the hospital. It's urgent. It's an emergency. And they didn't care. They didn't care because it's a religious fervor. Who cares if your baby dies? What's more important is that we stop oil or climate change, or we stop using petroleum and things like that.
Yeah.
It's irrational because it's insane. But they think that they believe in science when they're using scientific terminology to mask their religious ideological fervor to something that is truly evil.
Thank you for that, Pastor Eugene. And like you said in the beginning, we understand that all truth is God's truth, and our prayer is that our people would continue to, that we would continue to rely on God's word to tell us what that truth is. Any other comments, Pastor Eugene, before we end this scientific episode? We thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. We will not be here next week, but we will return in 3 weeks because I'll be gone for 2 weeks and you'll have your surgery for 2 weeks.
Well, that's the thing. Who knows what happens next week? We'll be back as fast as we can.
Yeah, ASAP.
What will we talk about? Oh, music.
Musica. What is your favorite artist of all time?
Meek Mills.
Oh, it's Meek Mill. It's 1 mil. So join us next week as we may talk about music. But if we don't, we'll be back as soon as possible. Tune in maybe next week to find out. We hope and pray that this has been a blessing in your ears. Fight the good fight, finish the race, keep the faith.
Peace.